right, we'll get right into it tonight. If you could, please turn with me again to Judges chapter 8. Verse 21 is where we'll be tonight. Judges chapter 8, verse 21 is where we'll start. I've really enjoyed going through this book. It's been interesting and it's been a challenge at times, but I really have enjoyed going through Judges and getting to see, you hear these stories as a kid, and you get these like glossy pictures of all these judges like they were all awesome people. And at the same time, like even though you're realizing that they're not as great as you might have thought initially, there's still so much truth that we can get out of these judges and the example that they are to us. And I've just really enjoyed it. And tonight we're going to kind of wrap up the story of Gideon. And so if you remember last week, just what we went over a little bit last week was Gideon seems to just completely derail and starts going nuts. He starts going after his own countrymen, and then when his pride is challenged by Zebah and Zalmunna, he kills them, and that's where we are at tonight. Is Gideon has just gotten done slaying these two kings. And we'll start here in Judges chapter 8, verse 21. And we're only going to read through 28 right now. So, verse 21. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Rise thou, and fall upon us, for as man is, so is his strength." And Gideon arose and slew Zebah and Zalmunna, and took away the ornaments that were on their camels' necks. Then the men of Israel said unto Gideon, "Rule thou over us, both thou and thy son's son also, for thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian." And Gideon said unto them, "I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you." Sounds really, really good. Sounds good. Verse 24. And Gideon said unto him, "I would desire a request of you, that you would give me every man the earrings of his prey. For they had golden earrings, because they were Ishmaelites." And they answered, "We will willingly give them." And they spread a garment, and did cast therein every man the earrings of his prey. And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides ornaments and collars and purple raiment that was on the kings of Midian, and besides the chains that were about their camels' necks. And Gideon made an ephod thereof, and put it in his city, even in Ophrah, and all Israel went thither a-whoring after it, which thing became a snare unto Gideon and to his house. Thus was Midian subdued before the children of Israel, so that they had lifted up their heads no more, and the country was in quietness 40 years in the days of Gideon. Now we're going to get into this tonight, but over the next couple weeks, I'm going to kind of break into almost like a little mini-series, and it's going to be entitled, the next couple weeks, it's going to be The Results of Pride. Because as a result of everything that we've seen throughout Gideon's life, and after this last chapter here where it details the closing years of Gideon's life, we'll begin to see the repercussions, if you will, of Gideon and his actions leading up to his death. So we'll start tonight going through verses 21, and then we'll even go almost to the end of the chapter, but I'm just going to pray real quick, and then we'll get into the message. Dear Lord, I just thank you for what you've done, Lord, and just for the study you've given me, and Lord, just how much it's pierced my heart, Lord, even in just studying this out and realizing some things. And Lord, I just pray that you'd help me to be able to communicate that tonight, and help me to be able to only speak your words, Lord. And I just pray that you'd be with me and be with us tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. So in verse 22, as we see there, as Gideon has just got done slaying the two kings, the men of Israel come to Gideon, and they say, "We want you to rule over us." Now, I have a couple questions, and tonight is going to be more of, it's almost like a lesson, so I'm going to ask for a lot of interaction from you all tonight. So, in the way that they're asking him, are they asking him to be king? Because doesn't it seem like, in a way, that they would be asking him kind of to be their king? Because they say to him in verse 22, Rule thou over us, both thou and thy son's son also. Doesn't that sound like a dynasty or a kingship? They're kind of asking him to rule over them. They just claimed, and at the end of that, they claim that he, Gideon, was the one that delivered them from Midian. At the end of verse 22 there, for thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian. So they're asking him, they approach him, and they basically ask him to be king without putting the title on it. They ask him basically to be king. So Gideon, in verse 23, simply proclaims, I will not rule over you, neither shall my son. The Lord shall rule over you. So I want to know what you think. What do you think he's doing here? Is he honest? Is he dishonest? What are some of your thoughts about what he's trying to do here? Dishonest, Brother Larry? No. He may. Anything else? Yeah, like a humble brag, like a kind of like putting himself down to appear good. Perfect political response. He says, I'm not going to be your king, but the Lord will be your king. Now, as you're looking at this, it's almost like, okay, your actions up until this point are not showing that is your intention. Right. On top of the fact, what we begin to see in the next subsequent verses, it doesn't seem at all like that was what he meant to say at all. Not to mention the fact that he doesn't call out the fact that they said that he was the one that gave them into the Midianites into their hands.
Well, to me, it seems like he's setting it up so whatever he says at any point in time, if someone pushes back and goes, hey, I don't like that, it's not me saying it. It's the Lord saying it.
Yeah, it's kind of another excuse on top of the fact that at this point, if you look at it, it's kind of the way that he's framing it. No, I'm not going to do that. But, and that's where we get into the next verse. Gideon said unto them, I will not rule over you, in verse 24, sorry. And he said unto them, I would desire a request of you. So it's kind of like he's denying the first one, and it's to say, but, you know what? There is one thing you could do for me. Because I've done this for you, and not calling them out, like he wasn't calling them out for the fact that they said, you're the one that delivered the Midianites into our hands. He wasn't calling them out for that and pointing the glory back to God. He was still taking all of the glory for himself. He says, I would desire a request of you, or I would ask you one thing, that you would give me every man the earrings of his prey, for they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. So the way that the army was thinking, every single man had a golden earring in his ear. So he was just saying, you know what? If everyone would give me the golden earring from his prey. So, of course, as if we look at it, if we look back in verse 21, he had already taken from Zebah and Zalmunna the ornaments off of their camels' necks, which it describes later on as also chains. So they were chains around the camels' necks that were these beautiful ornaments that showed the presence of a king. That's what it was. This was the king's camel. That's why it was ornamented so fabulously. So he already had this. He already had the spoils from the two kings. But he asks on top of that, can you give me the earrings? So, of course, they agree to the request of their hero. I mean, it's like Brother Jeff was saying, like we were saying. It's that whole, you know what? I'm not going to do that, but give me this, and it's okay. So, of course, they're like, yeah, that sounds reasonable. You delivered the Midianites into our hands, so yeah, that sounds reasonable. Sure, why not? He delivered us from these horrible oppressors. It's just earrings. It's not like it's all of their riches. It's not like it's all of their weapons and armor put together. It's just the earrings. So the 1,700 shekels of gold, in digging in and studying it, weight-wise, that is 40 pounds of gold. 40 solid pounds of gold. That's insane. 40 pounds of gold. When they gathered it all together and put it on the sheet, it was 40 pounds of gold. And it says there in verse 26, beside ornaments and collars and purple raiment that was on the kings of Midian, and besides the chains that were about the camels' necks. So now, not only does Gideon have all that stuff, it's saying besides all this other stuff, he's also got 40 pounds of solid gold. So what does Gideon do next? What is the next step that Gideon does? He gets all of these together on top of all the ornaments and collars and purple and chains that he had already obtained. He gathers them together, and it says in verse 27, and he made an ephod thereof and put it in his city. Now, an ephod is a garb that was usually worn by priests. And it was in Exodus that God was specific to them and said, only the priests are to wear the ephods. And an interesting thing in studying it is that this, the ephod, outside of the time in Exodus where they were setting up the rules for the temple, most of the other times it mentions ephods, and this one is a prime example, it's a twist of God's original will. It's a little bit of a twist of what God's original will was, and the person using the ephod wasn't supposed to have the ephod. And so every other example that we find in the Old Testament where it talks of it, it talks about this slight twist of what it was meant to be. And so the type of goat, what he does is he takes this coat and he makes the coat out of the purple, which was, by the way, the colors of royalty. It's known as the colors of royalty. And he takes the gold, which is also a sign of royalty, and he makes this glorious ephod that he sets up, this coat, if you will, that he sets in his hometown. Now, this story is interesting, and when you look at it, you can't help but compare it. And in my study, it referenced it a lot, the comparison between this and the only other time in the entire Old Testament that it talks about gold earrings. It's very interesting to hear it. There's only two in the entire Old Testament that talk about gold earrings, and both have to do with melting it down and building up of an idol, if you will. And the other one was back when Aaron told the whole children of Israel, get your gold earrings, get your wife's golden earrings, get all the gold you can find, and we're going to make this calf. So the only two times in the entire Old Testament that gold earrings are talked about, they melt it down and turn it into what would be an idol. And it's interesting. So these ephods, this ephod that he creates, he places in his city, as it says, of Ophrah. So Gideon, another interesting comparison is that, remember what Gideon did right after he saw the presence of the Lord? Where he was? He was in Ophrah. And he was commanded by God to tear down the idols that were in the city, the grove and the idols that were around it, and to build an altar to God there. And now, towards the end of the story of Gideon, he places his own idol, if you will, in the very spot where he tore down the idol before. Here we are in the middle of the cycle, not at the end of the judge cycle. This is still in the middle of the portion of the cycle where it's a judge. And now, as opposed to all the other judges, we're in the middle of the cycle, and before his time is done, the very judge that was supposed to lead them out of idolatry leads them directly into idolatry. And that's seen by at the end of verse 27. And all Israel went thither a whoring after it, which thing became a snare unto Gideon and to his house. This ephod that he made literally became a snare to the entire nation of Israel. It was such a glorious ephod that the whole nation and even Gideon's house went lusting after it, if you will. They wanted it. They wanted to consume it. It became an idol. They all desired after it. So then after all of this, it says, thus was Midian subdued before the children of Israel, so that they lifted up their heads no more, and the country was in quietness 40 years in the days of Gideon. Now, in previous ones, we saw that the land had rest. But now we start to see a little more of that downward spiral, and it's got quietness in the days of Gideon. It's not complete and total rest. It's quietness. So the nation as a whole was lusting after the ephod of Gideon. Midian is defeated here, and the land has rest. So it sounds all right, but then we get a greater picture of what Gideon has done in verses 23 through 31. So I'll read it real quick. And Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and dwelt in his own house. One of the commentators I was reading after was like, it's kind of ominous that now, after this whole time, of him being referred to as Gideon, and the only time he's really referred to as Jerubbaal is when the others are talking about him. But now that he's getting to the end of his life, the Bible, the narrator, if you will, describes him as Jerubbaal. So it goes back to that, and it's kind of ominous as to what's going to happen in the next couple chapters. Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and dwelt in his own house, and Gideon had 70 sons of his body begotten, for he had many wives. So how many is a score, kids? Do you remember how many a score is? Yes. 20. So 70. 70 sons. 70 sons, for he had many wives. 70 total. So we get to this point here where Gideon goes home to dwell on his house. He has 70 sons because he had many wives. And at this point in Gideon's life, Gideon has the fame of slaying the enemy king. He has an ephod that is colored in purple, which is the color of royalty. And this ephod snares the whole nation. He now has 70 sons. He has a harem of wives and concubines, as we'll see in verse 31. What does that sound like to you? For a man who just denied the fact that he wanted to be king, to me that sounds a whole lot like a king. Every little bit of it sounds like a king. He was a king. He was living like a king. The spoils of war, which you could say was the earrings that he got from all the men, the spoils of war usually went to the king. He had a kingly garment, if you will, because of his ephod. His 70 sons, the multiplicity of sons was always, in the olden days, was always to ensure that your name would last from generation to generation. There's no way, with 70 sons, there's no way you're not going to have one successor out of all 70 sons. There's no way. And so harems were for kings. Without the title of it, Gideon was living exactly like a king lives, even though he gave this statement that was obviously a hollow and false statement. I won't be king over you. I won't rule over you. He was living exactly like a king. And to further solidify that this was even Gideon's intent, that he thought he was living as a king, he names his son Abimelech in verse 31. And his concubine that was in Shechem, she also bare him a son whose name was called Abimelech. Interestingly enough, the name Abimelech literally means my father is king. The literal rendition of Abimelech, it means my father is king. He's literally, in his mind, he is a king. So in verse 32, we get to the end of Gideon's life, and it says, and Gideon the son of Joash died in a good old age and was buried in the sepulchre of Joash his father in Ophrah of the Abizrites. Now, another interesting thing that gives claim to the fact that Gideon thought he was a king or acted like a king, no other judge in the entire book of Judges is buried in a sepulchre. And the sepulchres were usually meant for those who were governors or those who had some kind of political power, if you will. So literally, for someone who rejected and acted like he was rejecting the title of king, he got everything that he wanted. Everything that he wanted. And Gideon puffs himself up for his last act as a judge. So what we can start to see from here is the first one that I want to focus on tonight, the first natural consequence of pride, if you will, would be idolatry. Specifically in this thing, self-idolatry. Now you could say that it was also the ephod, that it would be a form of idolatry, but if you look at the whole text in and of itself, Gideon set himself up pretty good. Gideon and his accomplishments and his conquest became his own idol. A natural consequence of pride is self-idolatry. So as he's going out and he's supposed to be the judge that leads them out of idolatry, that same exact judge that's supposed to lead them out of it led them directly right back into it, headlong, to where at the next little bit, verse 33, as soon as Gideon was dead, the children of Israel turned again and went whoring after Balaam and after Baal-berith their god. I mean, it wasn't just that they weren't in idolatry before this. Their idol was Gideon's ephod. And then it turned into Baal and Baal-berith and those other gods. So for us, and this was the thing I really had to, I had to point the Bible back at myself before I started this, because I know I've been preaching throughout Gideon's story about pride and about the different aspects of pride, but I really want to zoom in and focus on some of the real intricate parts of pride and some of the things that it can show up in our lives, because it's not until we start to realize those things in our lives that we want to do something about it. It's the things that are under the surface that we don't see, and it's too late that it becomes a problem that we can't handle anymore. So if we allow our pride to go unchecked, we will be consumed by it and become self-absorbed. And when you think about it, what is pride? Pride is a focus on oneself. It's lifting yourself up above others. It's things like that. So in all essence, what is idolatry? Is lifting something up higher than what is that God would be in your life. It's putting something on a higher plane than what God is on your life. And so pride in and of itself is idolatry of oneself. And so when we begin to think about this, isn't it so easy to think about yourself? I mean, in every single instance, I catch myself all the time, and I fail at it all the time, being married, where we go to plan somewhere to go out to eat, and I say that I want to go out to somewhere that we both want to go, and my desire instantly goes to Italian. I'm not even, every time, I'm like, well, there's this Italian place or this Italian, and I'm not even thinking about it, but subconsciously, I'm thinking about myself. I'm not actually thinking about my wife. And so, but isn't it so easy in so many different areas of our lives to instantly go to what we want and to think about ourselves? Just think in your mind and try and go an entire day where you're not selfish one time. And tell me if anybody in this room makes it. It's very, very hard to not be selfish, to not think about yourself. But when we give in to pride, and we begin to puff ourselves up, it could get to the point in our mind where even in little areas where you're just like, oh yeah, I did that pretty good. Over time, if you keep telling yourself that, oh yeah, I'm pretty good at this. And then it goes a little bit further. I'm the best at this. And then it gets to the point, nobody else is as good as I am at this. Okay, hold on. And it can get out of control. It can get to the point to where in our mind we're best. We are the best. But we are just steps, just inches away from self-idolatry. Just as the once timid Gideon had now become overrun with pride and takes all the glory for all the things that he had done in his life, when in reality God did everything that he guided every step of his way, we can be the same way, where we start to do things and we start to get accomplishments. And like in my own life, at the bank, we had a goal that we had to set. And I have felt like I was just kind of the person there that was keeping it oiled. Everybody else was the one pumping out all the production. And then the other day, I did something that closed a deal that got us to our production goal. And it was like, yeah! And then caught myself because I started telling everybody that I came into, hey, look, I helped make us to the thing. And then as I was studying this, I was like, you know what? That's self-pride. And the hardest thing is to begin to realize that there are so many points in our lives that we don't even realize it, but we lift ourselves up in this way that says, yeah, I did that. I did that. I did this. And over time, that attitude and that thought process in our minds can lead to the point to where we're just completely out of control, swelled up in pride. We must resist this urge to pride ourselves in our accomplishments and direct all the glory we gain to God. And that is so much harder said than done because of the fact that we're humans, we're flesh. We have a flesh. We have that sin nature that is constantly telling us to puff ourselves up. My pastor, one of the things that he has said in the past and that I hold to myself is that pride is the root of all sin, because if you're if you're going to do anything against God, it's because you want to. It's lifting yourselves up. So pride, and because of that, has all these nasty tanglements everywhere in our lives, and it's so hard to uproot that. But what is the solution to this type of pride? What is the solution? What is the way to not lift yourselves up in pride to the point of self-idolatry? The solution is simple, and the solution will be the same all the way throughout the rest of the story of Gideon, and the repercussions afterwards is just to be humble. There was one of the commentators said, can you imagine how great of a leader Gideon would have been had he not literally made himself a king? Had he been the spiritual ruler that he was supposed to be? In verse 32, it says he died in a good old age. The only other two people that it said that of in the Old Testament are Abraham and David. And it's usually, the commentator said that's usually saying that they had great faith in God, and that they died in a good old age. And so it was confusing to me when I first studied it, and I was like, why would it say that he died of a good old age? And the commentator said simply this: it could be the fact that he died of a good old age, and it's only referring to that faith that he had in that one moment where 300 were used by God to defeat 120,000, and God did that. It was only in reference to the fact that Gideon had faith that one time. But if he would have harnessed that same faith that he had in God then and used it throughout the rest of his life, how much would that have changed the cycle? If Gideon would have humbled himself and kept himself under the Spirit of God and done it from there. The solution is to be humble. And the hardest thing for us is that old nature, that old sin nature begins to creep up in us every single day and begins to puff us up. And as we will see from the subsequent chapters, pride can utterly destroy everything you love, and everything that you think you've built for yourself. If we look at it, in all reality, everything passes away. Everything that we could gain for ourselves in this life to make us look big just drifts away into eternity. It doesn't matter. What does matter is what God has for us in our lives. So the solution tonight, once again, to avoid the consequence of pride, which is self-idolatry, one of the consequences, solution is simple. We have to humble ourselves. And I think the hardest thing for us to begin to do, and what I began to do this week, is it's not until you're without something that you realize that you know how much you thought you needed it before. And so the challenge I want to pose to you tonight is to try and think this whole week. Try and just think. Take one day maybe write it down and say, for this day, I'm going to try my dead level best to not think of myself the whole day. And I know it's going to be hard, and I know we're all probably going to fail. But you'll be amazed once you start realizing that in your life, and once you start picking that out in your head, you'll go, and you'll catch yourself. But when you start catching yourself, you'll start to get an awareness of the fact of just how much we lift ourselves up in pride every day. And once you begin to do that is once you begin to be able to address the problems that are there. A small illustration to kind of illustrate this in a funny way is I have always, since I was little, I drank pop every single day, and I would drink pop at like 4 or 5 cans a day. It was bad. And even once I got here, I continued to do that. Well, the past 3 weeks, I went to just water. Only water. It was hard at first, and my wife can tell you, it was kind of weird, like just having water, because there's no flavor, and that's the hardest thing for me, was I was like, but there's no flavor in water. But it wasn't until I went 3 weeks without that I realized I got a lot more energy. I don't feel as bloated as I did before. Thank you. I feel healthier, and it wasn't until I was without that I realized how much I didn't need it. And so until we get that realization that we don't need, there's nothing in us that needs to puff ourselves up. We have everything we need in God. And it's not until we're without that, and it's not until we begin to realize how much we don't need that in our everyday, that we'll realize, I don't need to puff myself up. There's no reason to puff myself up. There's no reason to have pride in anything, because as I've said before, everything that we do in our lives is because of God and because of what God has done for us. So with that, my challenge for you this week is to try and at least take one day. At least take one day and make it like put up notes everywhere if you have to remind yourself throughout the whole day, and just try and catch yourself in those little times where you're just like, yeah, I did it. And like you try and puff yourself up. And maybe just whenever you have that, just pray to the Lord this week and say, Lord, I want to focus on you, and I want to give you glory for the accomplishments in my life. And maybe just direct for a second when you catch yourself. Direct glory for whatever's going on or whatever you did that you started to take pride in, and direct the glory back to God. And I'm telling you, once you do it, you'll be amazed at what God starts to show you in your life where you're taking little areas of pride. And that's just my challenge to you this week. It was more of a lesson. But I want to begin to, the next couple weeks, just look into these different consequences and how we can look into our lives and find those little ways. So that's my challenge for you this week. Just take one day, and try and think less of yourself, if you would, that day. Just think about God, and when that springs up a little bit, just pray to God and give Him glory for whatever's going on in your life and for what He's done. So we'll pray, and then we'll go into invitation and give you a chance to respond tonight. Dear Lord, I just thank you for what this has done in my life and the realizations it's been able to bring me to. And Lord, I just hope that this week that we just take one day to realize that everything that we have is because of you, and to reflect just in that one day, those little moments, reflect the glory of our life to you, because you're the one who's done it through us, Lord. So I just pray that you'd be with us and help us this week.